At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1942, Captain Paul Gunn crouched beneath the wing of a Douglas A-20 Havoc at Eagle Farm Airfield outside Brisbane, watching mechanics weld .50 caliber machine guns into the aircraft's nose, right where the bombardier's position used to be. He was 43 years old, had spent 21 years in naval service, and his wife and 4 children were imprisoned by the Japanese in Manila. The 5th Air Force was losing bombers faster than new ones could be delivered. In July alone, the 3rd Attack Group had lost 11 A-20s attempting high-altitude attacks on Japanese convoys. The bombardiers simply couldn't hit moving ships from altitude. When they dropped lower, Japanese deck gunners tore them apart. Captain Ed Lorner had watched 3 of his own crews die in flames in the Coral Sea just a week earlier. Japan was reinforcing New Guinea at will. Gunn had a completely different idea. If bombers flew low enough to skip their bombs across the surface like stones, they could strike ships at point-blank range, but they had to survive the approach, meaning they needed overwhelming forward firepower to silence deck guns. They needed to turn bombers into strafing gunships. There was one huge problem. The A-20 carried 4 .30 caliber nose guns, and .30 caliber rounds bounced off ship armor like pebbles. Gunn needed .50 caliber firepower, 4 of them mounted where the bombardier used to sit, firing forward at a combined rate of 1,700 rounds per minute. General George Kenney, the new 5th Air Force commander, gave Gunn 1 week to prove the idea viable. Gunn began stripping .50 caliber weapons from wrecked P-39 and P-40 fighters that would never fly again. The pilots had died, but their guns were still perfectly functional. He mounted the salvaged guns onto a steel frame inside the A-20's nose. Each .50 caliber gun weighed 64 pounds. 4 guns and ammunition added more than 200 pounds to the nose, shifting the aircraft's center of gravity dangerously forward. The first test flight nearly killed the pilot. The A-20 barely climbed and kept trying to pitch forward into the ground. Gunn spent 2 full days rebalancing the airframe, moving equipment aft, adjusting the tail trim. The second test pilot returned with the verdict, "It flies like it's angry, but it flies." On September 12, 16 modified A-20s attacked the Japanese airfield at Buna. The strafers came in at treetop height, guns blazing. They destroyed 14 aircraft on the ground and silenced every anti-aircraft gun. Not a single A-20 was lost. Kenney wanted more, but the A-20 had limitations. Its range was too short to cross the Owen Stanley Mountains. Its payload was too light. Gunn needed a bigger platform, the B-25 Mitchell. It had longer range, heavier lift capacity, and far more space for forward guns. In December, Gunn removed the bombardier station and factory nose guns from a B-25C and installed 4 .50 calibers in the nose, 4 more in cheek-mounted external pods, and rotated the top turret forward, 10 guns firing straight ahead. Then he added 2 more on each side, 14 forward-firing .50 calibers throwing 215 pounds of lead per second. The ground crews called it Pappy's Folly. If you want to see how Pappy's impossible gunship worked out, hit that like button. It helps us tell more stories like this. And subscribe if you haven't already. Now back to Pappy Dern. Gunn flew the prototype to Charters Towers to brief the 3rd Attack Group. The aircraft was nose-heavy, constantly trying to drop out of the sky on takeoff. Gunn had to apply full backstick pressure just to keep it level, but once airborne, the modified B-25 was a flying destroyer. Kenney ordered 12 more conversions on the spot. The 81st Air Depot Group in Townsville worked 18-hour days modifying every B-25 they could get their hands on. By February 1943, they had 30 fully operational strafers ready for combat. Then Kenney set the blueprints to Wright Field in Ohio. Army Air Force's engineers studied the modifications for 3 days and responded with a formal message. The changes were impractical. The center of gravity would be dangerously forward. The weight was excessive. The aircraft wouldn't fly correctly. They recommended grounding every modified B-25 immediately. Kenny happened to be in Washington when the message arrived. He walked straight into General Arnold's office, where the right field engineers were waiting to explain why Pappy Gung's gunship was impossible. Kenny informed them that 12 of the impossible planes had just played the decisive role in destroying a Japanese convoy in the Bismarck Sea. Every transport ship sunk, 60 more strafers already in modification. Arnold practically chased the engineers out of his office. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea began with intelligence intercepts on February 28, 1943. Allied codebreakers in Melbourne had cracked Japanese naval communications. A convoy was departing for Rabaul, 8 transport ships, 8 destroyer escorts, nearly 7,000 troops bound for Lae on the north coast of New Guinea. Kenny had 72 hours to stop them. The convoy's route crossed the Bismarck Sea between New Britain and New Guinea, 400 miles of open ocean. Japanese commanders believed the monsoon weather would protect them. March brought low clouds, heavy rain, and terrible visibility. Allied bombers couldn't strike what they couldn't see. They were right about the weather. They were dead wrong about the bombers. On March 2nd, reconnaissance aircraft spotted the convoy creeping south through the Vitiaz Strait. B-17 Flying Fortresses attacked from 15,000 feet through gaps in the cloud cover, dropping 137 bombs and claiming hits. Post-battle analysis found they sank nothing. High-altitude bombing against maneuvering ships was useless. The convoy sailed on. That night, the Japanese ships dispersed. Transports hugged the coastline. Destroyers formed a protective ring. Commanders believed they'd reach Lae by dawn on March 4th, unload their troops under cover, and shift the entire New Guinea campaign in Japan's favor. They had no idea what awaited them at first light. Captain Ed Larner briefed the 90th Bombardier Squadron in Port Moresby on the evening of March 2nd. 12 B-25 strafers, 30 modified A-20 Havocs, Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters for high cover, P-38 Lightnings to engage the Zero fighters. The strafers would attack at mast height, 50 feet above the water, point-blank range.
The plan itself was straightforward. Overwhelm the enemy's deck guns with a wall of concentrated fire. Skip bombs into the hulls while the ships were stunned and escape before the Zero fighters could arrive. Larner had flown exactly one practice mission using this tactic. During the briefing, his navigator asked what would happen if a strafer took hits during the low approach. Larner simply replied, "We'll find out tomorrow." The briefing wrapped up at 2200 hours. No one slept that night. At 6:30 on March 3rd, the entire strike force assembled over Cape Ward Hunt, 137 aircraft in all. The B-17s would strike first from altitude, drawing the Japanese gunners' aim upward. Then the strafers would come in low. The convoy lay 70 miles northwest of Lae when the B-17s reached it. The heavy bombers pushed through patchy clouds as the transports opened fire with every gun they had. Black bursts filled the sky. One fortress took flak and turned back. The rest held formation and pressed the attack. Then the strafers arrived. Larner led the B-25s in from the southeast at wave-top height. 14 forward-firing guns per aircraft, 168 guns across 12 B-25s, approaching in a line abreast formation that formed a 300-yard wide sheet of fire. The crew of the transport Kyokusei Maru spotted the attackers 2 miles away. The captain ordered a hard starboard turn. It was already too late. The B-25s opened fire at 800 yards. Streams of .50 caliber rounds tore across the water like a cutting saw. They ripped into the superstructure, shredded the bridge, and cut down the anti-aircraft gunners before they could swing their weapons around. 3 B-25s released their bombs at 100 yards. The first bomb skipped off the water, slammed into the hull below the waterline, and detonated inside the engine room. The second hit midship. The third missed. Kyokusei Maru was disabled in half a minute, burning, listing, and doomed. It went under 40 minutes later. That was only the first target. The transport Teomaru attempted to flee, engines at full power. 15 knots at best. The B-25s were doing 240 knots. There was no contest. 4 strafers split into 2 elements and bracketed the transport from both sides. Interlocking 50 caliber fire raked the deck. Anti-aircraft crews were killed at their positions. The bridge window shattered. The executive officer was struck by 3 rounds. The captain survived 10 more seconds before another burst took him down. The strafers dropped 8 bombs. 5 struck home. The ship literally broke in half. Many of the Japanese soldiers trapped below deck never managed to reach the surface. The transport sank in 6 minutes. Men leapt into the Bismarck Sea wearing full equipment. Their packs pulled them under. Australian Beaufighters attacked the destroyer Shikanami as it attempted to shield the convoy. The destroyer's gunners hit one Beaufighter, but the Australian pilot kept coming. His forward guns ripped the deck from bow to stern, killing the gun crews. By the time the B-25s arrived, Shikanami had no operational defense left. 3 strafers hit it from different angles. Bombs struck port, starboard, and amidship. The destroyer didn't sink immediately, but it was finished. Flames spreading, engines dead. The crew abandoned ship 2 hours later. By 0900 on March 3rd, the Japanese convoy was scattered across 40 square miles of ocean. 5 transports were burning or sinking. 2 destroyers were crippled. The remaining ships attempted to flee to Leh. They never made it. The strafers returned at 1400 hours, fully rearmed and carrying fresh bombs. The convoy had no fighter protection. The Zero fighters had landed at Leh to refuel. They were on the ground when the second wave hit. The transport Oigawa Maru took 12 bomb hits. The ship's magazine exploded. The detonation was visible from Port Moresby, 130 miles away. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained. No wreckage, no survivors. 1,800 Japanese soldiers vanished in 3 seconds. Captain Ed Larner strafed the Toa Maru next. His co-pilot counted 14 separate fires on its deck. Japanese troops were jumping overboard. Its anti-aircraft guns were silent. Larner's bombardier released at point-blank range. Both bombs struck. The transport slipped by the stern and rolled over. The modified A-20 Havocs hunted the damaged destroyers. The destroyer Asashio was trying to rescue survivors when 3 A-20s swept in from different angles. The crew, focused on the rescue, never saw the attackers until the guns opened up. 2 bombs struck the forward deck and bridge. Asashio burned through the night and sank at dawn on March 4th. By the evening of March 3rd, the entire Japanese convoy had been annihilated. 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers lost. Of nearly 7,000 troops that departed Rabaul, fewer than 1,200 reached Leh. About 2,700 survivors were recovered and returned to Rabaul. The rest died in the Bismarck Sea. Allied losses: 4 aircraft, 1 B-17, 3 P-38s, and 13 airmen killed. General MacArthur called it one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. Japan never again attempted to reinforce New Guinea by convoy. The entire course of the Southwest Pacific Campaign changed, and it changed because of Paul Gunn's impossible gunship. Back in Australia, the Wright Field engineers were still drafting a formal report outlining why the B-25 modifications could possibly not work. Kenny sent a message to General Hap Arnold on March 5th. The subject line read, "Commerce Destroyer Modifications Approved for Production." The body consisted of 1 paragraph. 12 B-25 strafers have just destroyed an entire Japanese convoy. Request immediate integration of forward gun package into all B-25 production aircraft.
After receiving the report, Arnold phoned J.H. Dutch Kindleberger, the president of North American Aviation, later that same afternoon. Kindleberger replied that his engineers needed to inspect the field modifications themselves. Arnold told him he'd send the man who created them. Paul Gunn was headed to California. Gunn didn't want to leave Australia. His wife, Polly, and their 4 children were still imprisoned in the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. The Japanese had held them since January 1942, 14 months of captivity. Gunn flew every mission, believing it brought him one step closer to the Philippines. Traveling to California meant moving in the wrong direction, but Kenny gave him a direct order. The 5th Air Force needed factory-built strafers, hundreds of them, and Gunn was the only person who could show North American aviation exactly how to build them correctly. Kenny promised him he'd be back in the Pacific within 6 weeks. Gunn landed in Long Beach on March 27, 1943. The North American plant spanned 140 acres and operated around the clock with 20,000 workers across 3 shifts. One B-25 rolled off the assembly line every 4 hours. Factory engineers studied Gunn's hand-drawn sketches. They asked about stress analysis. Gunn admitted he hadn't done any. They asked about wind tunnel testing. Gunn told them he'd tested the design by flying it in combat. They questioned the nose-heavy center of gravity problem. Gunn explained how he'd shifted radio equipment aft to restore balance. One engineer warned that the fuselage skin around the cheek gun mounts would buckle, that the .5 caliber muzzle blast would peel the aluminum apart. Gunn said it had. Then he showed them the blast tubes he'd welded to extend past the propeller arc, solving the issue. For 2 weeks, North American's engineers reverse-engineered Gunn's field conversions into factory-grade designs. They reinforced the nose structure, redesigned the gun mounts, added thicker aluminum skin around pressure points, and calculated the exact center of gravity compensation needed. They adjusted the tail trim accordingly. On May 10, 1943, the first factory-built B-25G Strafer came off the production line. It carried 4.5 caliber guns in the solid nose and a 75mm M4 cannon mounted in the forward fuselage, the same cannon used by the M3 Lee tank. A single round could punch through a destroyer's hull. Gunn test flew the prototype. The 75mm cannon recoiled 4 feet with every shot, jolting the entire airplane. The navigator had to reload the cannon manually. Rate of fire: 1 round every 30 seconds. Gunn told the engineers it was acceptable for attacking ships, less so for anything that moved quickly. North American produced 400 B-25G Strafers, then they refined the design again. The B-25H added 4 more .5 caliber guns in the cheek packs, 8 guns in the nose, 4 in the cheeks, 2 in the turret pointed forward, 14 guns total, plus the 75mm cannon, now with improved recoil handling. The navigator could reload faster. Rate of fire climbed to 1 round every 20 seconds. The later B-25J removed the 75mm cannon entirely and added 4 additional .5 caliber guns. 18 forward-firing guns, the most heavily armed production bomber ever made. North American built 4,900 B-25Js, delivering the first to the Pacific in October 1943. Gunn returned to Australia in early May, exactly 6 weeks after he'd left. His family was still in Manila. Meanwhile, the strafers kept destroying anything in their path. In April, B-25s wiped out 16 Japanese barges near Finschhafen. In May, they sank 12 transports at Wewak Harbor. In June, they struck the oil facilities at Balikpapan on Borneo. Japanese ships stopped traveling by daylight. It didn't save them. Strafers learned to attack at night using radar. They mastered skip bombing from 50 feet in total darkness. They coordinated with PT boats, which illuminated targets at the final moment with searchlights. The Japanese began calling the modified B-25s the Black Death. The name fit. On November 2, 1943, Major Ben Fraser led 4 squadrons of strafers into Rabaul Harbor, 137 Allied aircraft, including 59 B-25s. The harbor held 38 Japanese vessels.
cruisers, destroyers, tankers, cargo ships, and minesweepers. The strafers tore through phosphorus smoke that blinded enemy gunners. They attacked simultaneously from multiple directions. The Japanese couldn't track them all. In 15 minutes, 30 ships were hit. 5 sank outright, 12 were irreparably damaged, and the remainder were left crippled. Rabaul Harbor ceased to exist as a forward supply base. Gunn flew on that mission. He was 44 years old. He didn't have to fly combat anymore. He was a senior special projects officer. But his family remained prisoners in Manila, and every mission felt like a step closer. Reports coming out of Santo Tomas were grim. Reduced rations, no medicine, prisoners dying of starvation and disease. The Japanese camp commander had informed the Red Cross that all prisoners would be executed if Allied forces reached Manila. Gunn told Kenny he wanted to be on the first mission over Manila during the liberation. Kenny promised to make it happen. The strafers continued evolving through 1944. Some carried 8 5-inch high-velocity rockets. Some carried napalm tanks. Some carried parafrag bombs, small fragmentation bombs with parachutes that allowed low-altitude release without damaging the bomber itself. The deadliest tactic was the coordinated strike. High-level B-24 Liberators bombed from 20,000 feet, forcing Japanese gunners to look upward, and at that exact moment, the B-25 strafers came in low. By the time the defenders shifted their aim downward, the B-25s were already firing. During the first 8 months of 1944, 5th Air Force strafers destroyed 947 Japanese aircraft on the ground, sank 273 ships, and killed an estimated 38,000 enemy soldiers. The modified B-25 had become the dominant offensive weapon of the Southwest Pacific. Gunn kept innovating. He added extra fuel tanks for long-range missions. He improved gun cooling systems. He developed faster ammunition loading methods. Some B-25s in the Pacific carried modifications that existed nowhere else because Gunn had invented and installed them the night before the mission. Other theaters demanded strafers. Kenny sent them the blueprints. The Mediterranean modified B-25s for anti-shipping strikes. China-Burma India modified them for supply line attacks along the Burma Road. The concept Gunn pioneered in Brisbane spread across the entire Allied war effort. On October 20, 1944, American forces landed at Leyte in the Philippines. Manila's liberation was 3 months away. Gunn's family had been prisoners for almost 3 years. He flew multiple missions daily, refusing rest. He told his crew chief he wouldn't stop until his family was freed. Then came the attack. At 3:30 on November 27, 1944, 56 Japanese aircraft, Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 0 fighters, struck Tacloban airfield. They approached low from the north. Radar spotted them too late. Gunn was inside the operations tent reviewing plans for the morning mission when the first bombs fell. The tent stood barely 200 yards from the runway, far too close. The blast wave knocked him off his feet. Shrapnel ripped through the canvas walls. One fragment tore into his left leg, another slammed into his shoulder.
The medical officer found Gunn struggling to stand, blood soaking through his flight suit. Gunn insisted he needed to check on his aircraft. The doctor told him he needed surgery. Gunn managed to limp 30 more feet before collapsing. He was evacuated to the field hospital at Leyte. His leg wound was severe. The shrapnel had severed an artery. Surgeons told him he wouldn't fly again for at least 6 months, likely longer. The injury qualified him for medical retirement. He was 45 years old, with 26 years of combined service in the Navy and Army. He had more than earned the right to return home.
But Gunn told the surgeon he wasn't leaving the Pacific until his family was free. The Battle of Manila began on February 3, 1945. American forces fought through the city block by block. The Japanese had declared Manila a fortress and intended to defend every street. The fighting was brutal, building to building. Santo Tomas internment camp was liberated on February 3rd, 3,700 Allied prisoners freed. Gunn's wife, Polly, weighed just 89 pounds. His daughter, Julia, weighed 63. They had survived for a year on one daily meal of rice and thin vegetable broth. His son Nathaniel was suffering from malaria. His youngest daughter had dysentery. But they were alive. Against medical orders, Gunn flew to Manila on February 4th. His leg was still wrapped in bandages, and he walked with a cane. Doctors had only approved light duty, no combat flying. Gunn went straight to Santo Tomas. He found his family in the makeshift hospital the Army had established for liberated prisoners. Polly did not recognize him at first. He had lost 40 pounds. His hair had turned completely gray, and she mistook him for a doctor. Then he said her name, and she knew. The official Army record simply states that Colonel Paul I. Gunn was reunited with his family on February 4, 1945, at Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. Their reunion lasted 4 hours. Then Gunn returned to Leyte. His medical leave was not complete, but the war was not over. The modified B-25s kept flying. Other pilots, other crews, but all using Gunn's innovations. By the end of the war, North American aviation had built 9,600 B-25 Mitchells. Nearly 5,000 of them were Strafer variants, equipped with forward gun packages derived from Gunn's original field modifications. These Strafers sank more than 800 Japanese ships in the Pacific. They destroyed over 2,000 Japanese aircraft on the ground. They killed an estimated 85,000 Japanese troops. The commerce destroyer concept, dismissed by engineers as impossible, became the most effective anti-shipping weapon in the theater. Gunn never flew combat again. His leg wound ended his operational flying career. The Army retired him as a full colonel on June 30, 1948, due to medical disability. He was 48. He returned to the Philippines and rebuilt Philippine Airlines, the same airline he had created before the war. Philippine Airlines resumed operations in 1946. Gunn restarted the airline with 3 surplus C-47 transports, flying routes between Manila, Cebu, Davao, and other Philippine cities. The small pre-war company he had once built with 5 Beechcraft aircraft soon grew into a nationwide network. In 1947, the Philippine government awarded him the Distinguished Service Star. President Manuel Rojas presented it personally. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and exceptional service to the Republic of the Philippines during the Liberation Campaign, Colonel Paul I. Gunn's innovative modifications to Allied aircraft directly contributed to the defeat of Japanese forces and the freedom of the Filipino people." The U.S. military had already decorated him. Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Air Medal, and 9 Purple Hearts. The Distinguished Service Cross was recommended, but never approved. Some officers believed his achievements were technical rather than tactical. They were wrong. General Kenny wrote in his memoir, "Pappy Gunn was the most valuable man in the 5th Air Force. His mechanical genius and combat innovations changed the course of the war in the Southwest Pacific. Without his Strafer modifications, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea would have been a Japanese victory. Without Bismarck Sea, we would have lost New Guinea. Without New Guinea, the path to the Philippines would have been impossible." MacArthur agreed.
In a classified July 1945 letter to the War Department, he recommended Gunn for promotion to brigadier general. The request was denied. The Army Air Forces were downsizing. Promotions were frozen. Gunn remained a colonel. He never complained. He had achieved what he fought for. His family was free, the Philippines liberated, Japan defeated. That was enough. Philippine Airlines expanded throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s. Gunn acquired DC-3s, then DC-4s, then Convair 340s. The airline opened routes to Hong Kong, Bangkok, and Singapore. By 1956, PAL was flying to San Francisco. The small intra-island airline Gunn once created had become an international carrier. He flew constantly, Manila to Cebu, Cebu to Davao, Davao to Hong Kong. He could not stop. The war had taught him that movement meant survival. Staying still meant death. Some pilots believed Gunn was still running, still trying to outrun something. Perhaps the memories of Santo Tomas, perhaps the faces of the men who never returned from missions in his modified aircraft. On October 10, 1957, Gunn chartered a Beechcraft Model 18 twin-engine aircraft for a routine flight from Manila to Baguio, 140 miles north. The weather forecast predicted scattered thunderstorms over the Cordillera Mountains, but nothing severe. He filed his flight plan at 0800, scheduled to depart at 9:30 and arrive by 1100. The tower cleared him for takeoff at 9:28. The weather over the mountains deteriorated faster than expected. By 10:30, the Cordilleras were enveloped in heavy rain, turbulence, and almost no visibility. The Beechcraft's radio went silent at 10:47. Search and rescue teams located the wreckage 3 days later on a mountainside near Baguio.
The aircraft had flown straight into a storm cell. The pilots attempted to climb above it, but powerful winds pushed the Beechcraft into a mountainside ridge. The impact was instantaneous. No one survived. Paul Irvin Gunn died on October 11, 1957, just 1 week shy of his 58th birthday. The Philippine government honored him with a state funeral. 6,000 people attended. American veterans, employees of Philippine Airlines, former prisoners from Santo Tomas. General Kenny sent a wreath on behalf of the United States. On October 12th, the Manila Times published Gunn's obituary. The headline read, "War Hero Dies in Plane Crash." The article mentioned his distinguished flying cross, his central role in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, and his missions during the liberation of the Philippines, but it could not truly convey the magnitude of what he had accomplished. The raw numbers captured only part of his legacy. 5,000 B-25 strafers built following his modifications, 800 Japanese ships sunk, 2,000 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 85,000 enemy troops killed. But the true impact went far beyond statistics. Gunn's strafer concept fundamentally changed the way air forces conceived the role of bombers. Before Gunn, bombers dropped ordnance from altitude. After Gunn, bombers became multi-role attack platforms, capable of strafing, skip bombing, and providing close air support. The AC-130 gunship used in Vietnam traces directly back to Gunn's ideas. So does the A-10 Warthog. So does every modern aircraft built with forward-firing gun arrays. North American Aviation hired Gunn as a consulting engineer in 1948. He worked on the B-25 Tornado jet bomber, he advised on gun mounting configurations, he helped design forward-firing armament systems. The company paid him generously, money he mostly donated to veterans organizations. His son Nathaniel joined the U.S. Air Force, flew B-52s over Vietnam, retired as a colonel, and wrote a book about his father titled Pappy Gunn. It was published in 1994 and sold 12,000 copies. Still, most people had never heard of Paul Gunn. At the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas,
One of Gunn's original drawings is on display. The paper is yellowed. The dimensions are scrawled in pencil. The sketch shows 4.5 caliber guns mounted inside the nose of an A-20 Havoc. No stress analysis, no computer modeling. Just the rough, intuitive design that helped annihilate 8,000 Japanese troops in the Bismarck Sea. In 2008, the Air Force Association inducted Gunn into the Air Force Enlisted Heritage Hall. The citation praised his innovations, his combat service, and his influence on the evolution of modern attack aviation. 3 of his grandchildren attended the ceremony in Washington. Philippine Airlines still flies today, serving 42 destinations across Asia, Australia, and North America. In the company's Manila headquarters, a portrait of Gunn hangs in the main lobby. Most employees walk past it without knowing who he is. If this story moved you the way it moved us, please do one small thing. Hit the like button. Every like helps YouTube share stories like this with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're uncovering forgotten history from dusty archives, stories of mechanics and innovators who saved thousands of lives with improvised gun packages and battlefield genius. Real people, real courage, real impact. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, the Philippines, somewhere else? Our community spans the globe, and you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping ensure that Pappy Gunn's story does not slip into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that possible.